Today I'm going to talk a bit about the story of Joseph. Maybe you know a bit about his story. It's really quite an amazing story. Joseph had 10 older brothers. And those 10 older brothers did something to Joseph that was really, really mean. Brothers and sisters ever mean to each other? Does that happen sometimes? Brothers and sisters are sometimes mean to each other. But what Joseph's brothers did was way meaner than what normally brothers and sisters would do to each other. They didn't like him, and so they decided one day to throw him down into a pit. And then they thought, maybe we'll kill him. Isn't that terrible? And they decided, no, they weren't going to kill him. They were going to sell him as a slave, which means he had to become someone who would do work without getting any money. And they sold him as a slave, and he was taken down to Egypt. And while Joseph was in Egypt, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, had a dream. And Joseph was able to tell Pharaoh what that dream meant, because the Lord showed Joseph how he could do that. And Joseph told Pharaoh that his dream meant that there were going to be 7 wonderful years with lots to eat, and then 7 years of famine where there was not going to be enough food. And Joseph told Pharaoh what they should do to prepare for this, how they should gather up food so that they would be ready. And Pharaoh said, Joseph, you're a wise man. And he made Joseph pretty much the second most important person in all of Egypt. And just like that, Joseph went from being a slave to being an incredibly powerful person. And then, later, those 10 brothers of Joseph, those 10 older brothers who had done such a horrible thing to him, they came to Egypt because they had no food. And they knew that there was food for them in Egypt. And so they came and they asked Joseph to buy food, but they didn't recognize him. They didn't think that this powerful man could possibly be the brother they had sold as a slave. And this is the part of the story where Joseph tells his brothers who he is. And listen to what he says about who it was that made all of these things happen. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So he sends out all the other people, everyone except his brothers. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud. And the Egyptians and all the house of Pharaoh heard it. And then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. They were just too amazed that he said he was Joseph. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near me." And so they came near, and then he said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not let yourselves be grieved or angry because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son, Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry.'" So Joseph explained who he was, and he explained what happened. And who did he say had been in charge the whole time? Who? He said that he was in charge of Egypt, but who did Joseph say had been in charge of all the things that happened? Who's really in charge? The Lord. Joseph kept on and on saying that the Lord had sent him there, that the Lord had made all those things happen. Now, did the Lord sell Joseph as a slave in Egypt? No, that was his brothers who did that mean thing. Will the Lord ever do something so mean as that? Was he happy when Joseph's brothers did that terrible thing? How do you think he felt when he watched them throw Joseph into the pit and then sell him as a slave? How did the Lord feel? He felt sad. So the Lord wasn't making Joseph's brothers do that. He wasn't making those things happen. But what Joseph believed was that even though something really sad was happening, the Lord was still in charge. And he believed that because the Lord was still in charge, the Lord could take care of him and the Lord could help him be okay. Joseph knew that the Lord was with him even when he was in that pit. And he knew that the Lord was with him even when he had to work as a slave. He knew that even though bad things happened, the Lord was always in charge. Now, sometimes it feels to us like the Lord's not in charge, or we forget that the Lord's still with us in our lives. And we think that all that's ever going to happen to us is bad things because we're in a grumpy mood and that's all we can see. That's all we can think about. Bad things. Or we feel sad and we feel like nothing can ever make us happy again because we forget that the Lord is in charge. Joseph trusted in the Lord. He trusted that the Lord was going to lead him someplace good. And because of that, he was able to forgive his brothers. He wasn't mad at them. And he was able to share a blessing with them. And he was able to tell them that all of that had happened because this whole time the Lord had been the one in charge. The Lord had been the one who was taking care of things.